The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple as the dust settled on the quiet frontier town of Redemption Creek. The air smelled of sagebrush and gunpowder, a reminder of the lawlessness that still clung to these parts like a second skin. The saloon doors creaked lazily in the evening breeze, and the distant sound of a harmonica drifted from somewhere down the main street. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear, or be found if he wasn't careful. Two figures rode into town on worn but sturdy horses, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. The twins, Elias and Caleb Carter, were known in these parts, not for their kindness, but for their ruthlessness. They were men of few words, their reputations built on the barrels of their Colt revolvers and the cold precision with which they handled trouble. Elias, the elder by 5 minutes, had a scar running from his temple to his jawline, a souvenir from a knife fight in El Paso. Caleb, leaner and quicker to smile, carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd stared death in the face more times than he could count. They weren't in Redemption Creek for pleasure. Word had reached them 3 days prior, carried by a half-dead drifter who'd collapsed at their campfire. The sheriff of Redemption Creek, a man named Harlan Griggs, had taken a Cherokee girl from her village under the pretense of questioning. The drifter had spat blood as he spoke, his voice raw with urgency. "He ain't askin' questions. He's got a score to settle, and she's the payment." The twins didn't much care for the law, but they cared even less for men who preyed on the weak. They'd seen what happened to women, especially native women, when men like Griggs got their hands on them. So they rode hard, pushing their horses to the limit, their jaws set with the kind of determination that came from knowing they were the only ones who could stop what was coming. The sheriff's office was a squat, wooden building at the end of the main street, its windows dark. The twins dismounted, their boots kicking up dust as they tied their horses to the hitching post. The town was quiet, too quiet. No one lingered outside, no laughter spilled from the saloon. It was the kind of silence that meant trouble. Elias pushed open the door to the sheriff's office without knocking. The room inside was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp on the desk. Behind it sat Harlan Griggs, a barrel-chested man with a face like a bulldog and a star pinned to his vest. His eyes flicked up, narrowing as he recognized the twins. "Well, if it ain't the Carter boys. What brings you to my fine establishment?" Caleb didn't bother with pleasantries. "We heard you got a girl back there. Cherokee." Griggs leaned back in his chair, a slow, ugly smile spreading across his face. "Now, why would you care about some Injun girl? She's a thief. Stole a horse from one of my deputies." Elias's hand twitched toward his revolver. "We both know that's a lie." The sheriff's smile faltered for just a second before he shrugged. "Don't much matter what you believe. Law's the law." Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. "Hand her over, Griggs. This is your last warning." For a moment, the room was so still it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then Griggs laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Or what? You gonna draw on me in my own office?" Elias didn't hesitate. His Colt was in his hand before the words had fully left Griggs's mouth, the hammer cocked back with a click that echoed like a gunshot. Caleb had his own revolver out a second later, the barrel pointed squarely at the sheriff's chest. Griggs's face went pale, his hand freezing halfway to the shotgun propped against the wall. "Last chance," Elias said, his voice as cold as the metal in his hand. Griggs's jaw worked, but he didn't move. "Fine. Take the damn savage. But you're making a mistake, boys." Caleb didn't lower his gun as he moved toward the back of the office, where a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. He kicked it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was little more than a cell, the air thick with the scent of sweat and fear. And there, curled into a corner, was the girl. She was younger than they'd expected, no more than 21, her dark hair tangled and her dress torn at the shoulder. Her eyes, wide and defiant, locked onto Caleb's as he stepped inside. "You with them?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Caleb holstered his revolver and crouched in front of her. "No. We're here to get you out." The girl, Lena, she told them as they half-carried, half-led her out of the cell, didn't speak again until they were outside, the night air cool against her skin. She looked up at the twins, her expression unreadable. Why? Elias swung up onto his horse and reached down a hand to pull her up behind him. Because no one deserves what he had planned for you. Caleb mounted his own horse, his eyes scanning the dark street. We'll get you somewhere safe. Then you can decide what's next. Lena didn't answer. She just wrapped her arms around Elias's waist, her fingers gripping the worn leather of his belt. The twins exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They'd ride through the night if they had to. The law wouldn't touch her again. The moon hung high and pale over the desert, casting long shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers across the cracked earth. The twins rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of hooves and the occasional whisper of wind through the mesquite bushes. Lena sat behind Elias, her body tense, her breath shallow. She had spent the last hour watching the darkness, expecting Griggs or his men to materialize from the blackness at any moment. But so far, the night remained still. Caleb rode slightly ahead, his rifle resting across his saddle, his eyes sharp as he scanned the horizon. He wasn't just watching for pursuers, he was watching for a place to rest. The horses were tiring, and Lena's grip on Elias's waist had grown weaker, her exhaustion evident in the way her head occasionally drooped against his back. There, Caleb said finally, pointing toward a cluster of boulders jutting from the earth like the ruins of an ancient fortress. We can make camp there. It's high ground, good line of sight. Elias grunted in agreement and guided his horse toward the rocks. Lena didn't protest. She was too tired to care where they stopped, as long as it wasn't Redemption Creek. The twins worked quickly, their movements practiced. Elias built a small fire, shielding the flames with his body to keep the light from carrying too far. Caleb unsaddled the horses and led them to a patch of sparse grass, murmuring to them in a low voice. Lena sat on a flat rock near the fire, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Caleb tossed her a canteen. Drink. She caught it, her fingers brushing his for a second. His skin was rough, calloused from years of handling reins and rifles. She took a sip, the water cool and metallic against her tongue. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb crouched beside her, his face half lit by the fire. You don't have to thank us. We didn't do it for that. Lena studied him, then glanced at Elias, who was kneeling by the fire, poking at the embers with a stick. The twins were so alike, yet so different. Elias was all sharp edges and silence, his presence like the stillness before a storm. Caleb was quicker to speak, his words laced with a dry humor that never quite reached his eyes. Both of them carried the weight of something unseen, something that made their smiles rare and their gazes distant. Why did you do it? She asked again. Caleb sighed and sat back on his heels. Because we've seen what happens when men like Griggs get their way. And because we could. Lena looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her dress. You think he'll come after us? He might, Elias said, his voice low. But he won't find us easy to catch. A gust of wind sent a shower of sparks into the air, and Lena flinched. Caleb noticed, his brow furrowing. You cold. She shook her head, but he stood anyway, walking to his saddle and pulling out a worn blanket. He draped it over her shoulders, the fabric still warm from the horse's body. Lena pulled it tight around herself, the scent of leather and sweat comforting in a strange way. You should sleep, Elias said. We'll keep watch. Lena wanted to argue, to say she wasn't tired, but the words died on her lips. The fire was warm, the blanket heavy, and the twins' presence, though intimidating, was somehow reassuring. She lay down on the rock, curling onto her side, her head resting on the folded blanket. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Caleb sitting beside her, his rifle across his lap, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. The night passed slowly. The twins took turns keeping watch, their eyes never still, their ears straining for the sound of approaching riders. But the desert remained quiet, the only disturbances the occasional cry of a coyote or the rustle of a snake in the brush. Lena woke with a start, her heart pounding. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, the darkness pressing in around her like a suffocating blanket. Then she remembered, the twins, the fire, the escape. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and saw Caleb sitting a few feet away, his back against a boulder, his hat pulled low over his face. "You're supposed to be sleeping," she said, her voice husky with sleep. Caleb lifted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "So are you." She looked around. The fire had burned down to embers, the first hints of dawn painting the sky in shades of gray. "Where's Elias?" "Scouting the ridge." Caleb nodded toward the darkness. "He'll be back soon." Lena hugged her knees to her chest, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "You trust him that much?" Caleb's smile faded. "With my life. Always have." She wanted to ask more, to dig into the history of these two men who had ridden into her life like avenging spirits, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Caleb's expression had darkened, or the way his fingers tightened around his rifle. Maybe it was the understanding that some wounds weren't meant to be picked at. Elias returned as the sun began to rise, his face grim. "Tracks," he said, dropping to a crouch beside the fire. "Half a dozen riders, maybe an hour behind us." Caleb's jaw clenched. Griggs. Or his men. Elias's eyes flicked to Lena. "They're not giving up." Lena's stomach twisted. "What do we do?" "We ride," Caleb said, standing and slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Hard and fast. We'll lose them in the canyon." Elias nodded. "Pack up. We leave in 5. Lena moved quickly, folding the blanket and securing it to Caleb's saddle. The twins worked with the same efficiency, their movements synchronized, their expressions focused. There was no fear in them, no hesitation. Just the cold determination of men who had long since accepted that death was always a heartbeat away. They mounted up, Lena once again behind Elias, her arms wrapped around his waist. The twins didn't speak as they urged their horses forward, their eyes on the horizon. The canyon loomed ahead, a jagged gash in the earth, its walls high and its shadows deep. It was a dangerous path, but it was their best chance. As they rode, Lena could feel the tension in Elias's body, the way his muscles coiled like a spring, ready to react at the first sign of trouble. She pressed her cheek against his back, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the thud of the horse's hooves. The wind rushed past them, carrying the scent of dust and sage, and for the first time since she'd been taken, Lena felt something flicker inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. The twins had saved her. And for now, that was enough. The canyon swallowed them whole. The walls rose up on either side, towering and jagged, casting the narrow path into near-total darkness. The only light came from the sliver of sky above, a pale blue ribbon that seemed impossibly far away. The air was cooler here, damp with the scent of wet stone and the faint metallic tang of old blood. This place had seen violence before, and it would see it again. Elias slowed his horse to a walk, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We'll lose them in here," he muttered, more to himself than to Lena or Caleb. "But we've got to move fast. They'll be on us before noon." Caleb rode beside him, his rifle held loose in his hands, his gaze sharp. "You think they'll split up?" "If they're smart, they will." Elias's voice was grim. "Griggs isn't smart, but his men might be." Lena clutched Elias's waist tighter, her knuckles white. She could hear the distant echo of hooves now, faint but unmistakable. They were coming. The twins didn't speak again. They didn't need to. They'd ridden into enough ambushes to know the drill. Keep moving, stay alert, and trust each other's instincts. The canyon twisted and turned, the path narrowing in places until the horses had to pick their way carefully over loose rocks. Lena could feel the tension in Elias's body, the way his muscles tensed with every sound, every shift in the wind. Then, without warning, the first shot rang out. The crack of the rifle echoed off the canyon walls, the sound deafening. A bullet kicked up dust at their feet, and Elias's horse reared, nearly throwing Lena off. He cursed, fighting to bring the animal under control as Caleb wheeled his own horse around, his rifle already at his shoulder. "Get down!" Caleb barked, firing 2 quick shots into the darkness. Lena didn't hesitate. She slid off the horse, pressing herself against the canyon wall as another volley of gunfire erupted. The twins dismounted just as quickly, using the horses for cover as they returned fire. The canyon was a death trap, every shot echoed, every movement amplified. But it was also their advantage. The twins knew how to use the land, how to make it work for them. Elias grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her deeper into the shadows. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. "And don't move no matter what." She nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She watched as the twins split up, Caleb moving to the left, Elias to the right, their movements fluid and practiced. They fired in unison, their shots precise, their targets unseen but unmistakable. The return fire slowed, then stopped altogether. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, the distant whinny of a wounded horse. Then, a voice cut through the silence. "You're surrounded, Carter." Griggs. His voice was rough, triumphant. Lena's stomach twisted. She could picture him standing at the canyon's entrance, his men fanned out around him, their rifles trained on the twins. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The twins had been in this position before, and they both knew the truth. Surrounded or not, they weren't beaten yet. Elias caught Lena's eye and jerked his head toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. She understood immediately. Moving as quietly as she could, she slipped into the shadows, pressing herself into the tight space. The rock was cold against her back, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the twins, on the way they stood side by side, their backs to the wall, their rifles ready. "Last chance, boys," Griggs called. "Hand over the girl, and I'll let you walk out of here." Caleb's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You always were a liar, Griggs." A shot rang out, and Caleb flinched, his shoulder jerking back. Lena gasped, but he didn't go down. He fired back, his aim steady despite the blood seeping through his shirt. Elias moved at the same time, his revolver flashing as he picked off two of Griggs's men in quick succession. The canyon erupted into chaos again, gunfire and shouts filling the air. Lena couldn't just watch. She scrambled deeper into the crevice, her fingers closing around a loose rock. It wasn't much, but it was something. She waited until one of Griggs's men moved too close. His back turned as he reloaded his rifle. Then she struck. The rock hit him square in the back of the head. He stumbled, cursing, and Caleb didn't hesitate. His bullet found its mark, and the man went down. Lena didn't have time to think about what she'd done. She just moved, grabbing the man's fallen rifle and rolling back into cover. The twins saw what she'd done. Elias's eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, something unreadable passing between them. Then he nodded, his focus snapping back to the fight. It was over quickly after that. Griggs's men, realizing they were outmatched, began to falter. The twins pressed their advantage, their shots relentless, their movements a blur of precision and fury. Griggs himself tried to flee, but Caleb's bullet caught him in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground. He screamed, his hands clutching at the wound, his face twisted in pain and rage. Elias stood over him, his revolver pointed at Griggs's chest. "You should have walked away," he said, his voice cold. Griggs spat at his feet. "You'll regret this." Caleb holstered his rifle and crouched beside Lena, his hand pressing against his bleeding shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded, her hands shaking. "You? Fine." He managed a grin, though it was strained. "Just a scratch." Elias turned away from Griggs, his expression dark. "We need to move. They'll send more men once they realize he's not coming back." Caleb helped Lena to her feet, and the three of them moved quickly, gathering the horses and what supplies they could salvage. Griggs's men were either dead or fleeing, their confidence shattered. The canyon was theirs now, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a warning. They rode until the canyon opened up into a wide, sunlit valley. The air was warmer here, the scent of sage and wildflowers thick in the breeze. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her body sagging with relief. Elias reined in his horse and turned to her. "We'll get you to the Cherokee lands. You'll be safe there." Lena looked at him, then at Caleb, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What about you?" Caleb shrugged. "We'll manage." She wanted to argue, to tell them they couldn't just leave her, that she owed them something, anything. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the small, intricately beaded pouch she always carried. Inside was a single eagle feather, a gift from her grandmother. She pressed it into Caleb's hand, then did the same with Elias. "For luck," she said. The twins exchanged a glance, something passing between them that didn't need words. Elias nodded, his fingers closing around the feather. "We'll see you again, Lena." She knew it was a promise, not just a farewell. As they rode away, the sun high overhead, Lena watched them until they disappeared over the horizon. Then she turned her horse toward home, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The twins had given her more than just her freedom. They'd given her a reason to believe in something again, even if it was just the idea that sometimes the right people showed up when you needed them most.